We just had a runway for 6 months. Quite a few times we think, I'm not happy here, let me become an entrepreneur, I'll become rich quick. That never ever happens. Looking back in your life, you don't regret the decisions which you took and you messed up, but the ones that you never took. Basically, I started moonlighting. So I moonlighted for good 5 years. So Indian travel market, which consists of air, hotel, of course trains and intercity bus and intercity cabs, is around $55 billion.
Beyond, of course, profitability and growth, which is the mantra for this podcast. Customer money is way better than VC money. Welcome to the Prime Venture Partners podcast. I am delighted to have with me today Gaurav Aggarwal, founder and CEO of Savaari. Welcome to the show, Gaurav.
Thank you, Amit. Glad to be here.
Gaurav, I spent several years in the travel industry, working at MakeMyTrip. And from what I remember, transportation was a really tough business. And then in particular, intercity transportation was even harder yet, whether it was buses or it was car rentals and so forth. So love for you, to tell our listeners and our viewers, how you thought about getting into this business in the first place, and maybe just a little bit of your own personal journey as well.
Sure. So basically, this all started. I went to the US in '98, and since '99, I had been traveling within the US. So every city that you go to in the US, that there are 4 or 5 car rental companies that you can hire the car from, and pretty much their character. Like Hertz is more expensive, more corporate focused, and Dollar has always had deals, and I used to book from them. So it's more retail oriented. So in 2004, I wanted to come back to India, and there was a travel that I wanted to do, which was Intercity, which was from Delhi to Roorkee. And that's where I thought, usually what I had been doing there is that I'll book a car rental, chauffeur-driven car rental, which will take me from Delhi to Roorkee. And I wanted to do that online. But to my surprise, I could not find any cab rental company that I could book from. Of course, there were some companies, franchisees of these European US companies that were there, but they were way too expensive, more corporate focus. And that's where the whole thought of, that we need a car rental company that you as a customer can go to any city in India, and that you're getting a quality, reliable service at very competitive rates. So pretty much like buying a Colgate. So that's how the idea originated. And then I think soon after, within a year, I was able to find some travel person who was able to provide me the ground support. And then I put up a website, and that's how Savaari started. So this is way back in 2006.
2006. And very interestingly, you were at Intel, I think?
No, I was in Cisco.
You were in Cisco, sorry. So that was must have been a stark change to even imagine going from a tech company like a Cisco to starting up a car rental company. Like, how did that transition happen in your mind? And not just for you, I'm assuming for your family, for your other colleagues, saying, hey, what the heck is Gaurav doing?
So I took a long time to do that. So basically, I started moonlighting. So I moonlighted for good 5 years while I was working full-time for Savaari. And of course, little did I realize that I started initially putting 1 or 2 hours every day. The website was up, and we started getting our orders soon after that. So little did I realize that those 1 or 2 hours have changed to 4 or 5 hours that I'm working over the years. And in the third year, we were completely profitable, at least with the lean team. I was not drawing any salary, but at least we were able to manage our operations. So that's how sort of, in 2009-10 is when I started seriously considering that I need to move back to India, which I always wanted to do that. And given the traction that I was seeing in Savaari and the fun that I was having doing Savaari, I thought, it's a good time that I should move back. And then I did a trip prior to that, where I met quite a few VCs like yourself. And then I got a very good vibe and got a fairly good positive response from them. So that bolstered my decision that this is the right time. And that's how it happened. Of course, my family none of in my family, there were no entrepreneurs per se. So my father worked for ONGC for good 35 years.
Hey, my dad too.
Really?
Small world, yeah.
Yeah, so he started his job there and retired from it. So he was sort of not very keen on that. But his only condition was that, at least one of you, my wife and I, should have a stable job. So my wife got a transfer from Cisco US to Cisco India. And that's how that problem got solved. So that's how the change happened. And of course, it was in Savaari also, we knew that it's not we are going to own cars. So we are not going to do the heavy lifting of worrying about the on-ground parts. That will leave to the vendors, but we'll provide a platform. So it was always a tech aspect in it. Of course, the usage and the implementation was different. I mean, Cisco, of course, I was doing, I was coding in C. I was a software developer there for good 10 years, coding in C, doing some really cutting edge technology, and with some great folks that were there. So there was a difference, but
understood.
But at least the tech part was common.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. Let's say there's somebody sitting in the US right now, in Silicon Valley or elsewhere for that matter, in Seattle or Austin, thinking about all this crazy stuff happening in India on entrepreneurship, and companies are getting funded, and there's ebbs and flows, but largely it's a very bullish. Just saw a tweet from Paul Graham today. Somebody asked Paul Graham, the Y Combinator founder, some Indian founder asked him in a new cohort saying, hey, should I incorporate in the US or India, and should I live in the US, in the Bay Area or India? And he said, you must absolutely live in India. The startups ecosystem is happening. Having made that transition yourself, what advice would you give somebody circa 2024 if they're thinking of starting up in India? Somebody based in the US who wants to start up in India?
So I think you have to be in the place where you're starting. I mean, I'm assuming that your audience base is here.
Yeah, let's say.
Where your customers are. You have to be there. You have to live and breathe that. So sitting in the US, of course, when I was moonlighting, you're away from that. So you have to be inside India. You have to understand that. You have to use the services here. Then you realize the driver mentality. How is it? So you have to experience it firsthand. So you have to be in the place where you're doing. Sitting from a distance, I don't think you can run a company.
Of course. No, but in terms, I was saying, do you have any suggestions on how would they make the transition? They're willing to make the transition, right? They may not be able to moonlight or may not want to moonlight for 3, 4, 5 years. So let's say you have an idea and you say, let me go to India and get this going. It's going to be a pretty big culture shock, right? I also lived in the US for 14, 15 years before moving to India. It was a big reverse culture shock to work here professionally, right? So in terms of getting started up in India, any tips or suggestions, or you have to sort of figure it out?
No, I believe that, in my case, I always wanted to come back to India. So there was no culture shock in the sense that I was born and brought up here. So for me, it was no different. Of course, if I were to join a company, their culture may be different than what I'm experiencing in US. But for doing my own thing, I don't think there was a difference. So, and one advice or the suggestion that I would have is that, come with the mindset of not going back. Otherwise, if you were to compare, you can't compare. India has everything. India always had everything. Now, of course, with the flourishing VC ecosystem, it's much more prevalent. So, there's you have to decide what you want. India has everything to offer.
Absolutely. Burn the bridges or burn the boat, as the case may be. So, let's switch gears into just the India travel market, and in particular, the area that you play in. Can you share with our listeners some insights about what's up in the intercity transportation market, and not just the cab rental? Perhaps, I'm sure you compare yourselves to an alternative of somebody taking a Shatabdi or a Vande Bharat, or taking a bus or something like that. So just some broad stats on how Indian consumers are moving across intercity, at least in the areas that you would like to play in.
True. So just I'll start with the travel market. So Indian travel market, which consists of air, hotel, of course trains, and intercity bus and intercity cabs, is around $55 billion. So of course 20 plus is air, 10 plus is say hotels, and the rails, the intercity bus and the intercity cabs are all around 7 billion. So that's how big the market is. And of course the travel is happening, especially after COVID. So I think probably last year was one of the best years that we have had for travel. So there's a lot of growth happening and people are traveling. Weekend getaways are happening in a big way. So the opportunity is certainly there. And of course, given that one shift that we have seen as per COVID is earlier that our business, if you were to look at, while it was always focused on intercity, but there are two paths to intercity. One is a round trip thing where you keep the car and driver with you. The other is the one where you just you move from one city to another city. So
a one-way drop.
One-way drop. So a lot of the one-way intercity drops have started happening, especially after COVID happened, and that's what we also started focusing on. And currently it contributes almost as 40% of our revenue. So it's doing well, and that's where the comparison comes directly with the intercity bus, with the rails that you have. So our prices are so competitive that if you're a party of 2 or 3, then probably an intercity drop, as compared to even rails or even bus, will be economically cheaper too. And of course, it gives you the advantage that you are picked up from your door and you're dropped at the door. So that's where sort of, at least we are finding that there's a great opportunity there.
So I'm very surprised to hear that stat of 40% one-way drops. Why is that? Is that still like short haul? Is it convenience? Short haul meaning like 200-300 kilometers as opposed to 500, 700, 800 kilometers. What is the trigger point from the customer's point of view to do this beyond comfort, of course?
So comfort is certainly there. 200-300 kilometer is the sweet spot. So maybe 200 to 400 is the sweet spot. And of course, we have the biggest route, which is Mumbai-Pune, which is around 150 kilometer, even Bangalore-Mysore for that matter. So I think that's a sweeter spot. So one is, even when you're going to Kurk, for example, you're staying in a resort. So all you want is, first day, just drop me there, and third day, pick me up. So the resorts also have become a full-fledged thing where you're probably spending the entire time. So those are some of the things that are leading it. And of course, business travel has always been there. I mean, you can actually take a drop from Bangalore to Mysore, then come back when your work is done. So these are the basic indicators. And of course, during COVID, road travel is really happening.
Yes.
So that's why people want to explore more. The highways are sort of being built at a very fast pace. So all that is leading to a lot of people traveling in general.
Makes sense. Any surprising stats with respect to, like you said, Mumbai Pune was in fact, I remember Bhavish of Ola started in Mumbai Pune before he pivoted Ola to a intra-city market and intra-city, cab service and all that. And I think Mumbai Lonavala, if I'm not mistaken, were some of the early routes that he was experimenting with. But any like other popular sectors, preferred cars, surprising itineraries that you have seen or use cases that people are using Savaari for?
So one is, of course, COVID was a very different time. So in COVID, we have seen people traveling all the way from Bangalore to Calcutta. So leave alone the distance part.
Wow.
So they were moving all the way from there, or Bangalore to say Bhubaneswar, or Hyderabad to Mumbai, Chennai to Mumbai. So all these long routes that we have seen. But we see that, there's a lot of travel happening to even off-beaten places like Mungi and, Mumbai to Mungi, where, which is an alternate for Lonavala. Then you have these, places like Gokarna where a lot of people are traveling. And some of these places can only be explored through road travel. Yeah. So that's where sort of we are seeing.
And how about like preference of car or like, like size of your party? Like you were saying 2 to 3 makes it economical. Is it just families? Is it individuals? Is there any kind of emerging pattern there?
So it's a mix of both. Most of the leisure things will be with family or with friends. And as far as our stats is concerned, around 70% is a sedan. The remaining around 65% is sedan, and then which is a 4-seater. Then you have a 6-seater, which is around 30-35% odd percentage, and then remaining is very minor. So these are the two broad categories, not even hatchback. So sedan is the most preferred one because it's a longer travel. People want that space.
So sedan is like a Swift Desire or something like that?
Yes, Swift Desire, Etios.
And then of course on the longer one it will be like an Innova. I've been a Savaari customer for a few rides. I certainly remember an Innova, and then of course maybe a Desire or an Etios. I'm not sure.
So those are the more popular.
Now
it's of course Innovas are not there, so Cristas are there, which are very expensive.
Yeah.
So there's another category of SUVs, which is like Maruti Ertiga. And
yes.
So those are also coming up.
Understood. I know, Gaurav, you mentioned that you are asset light, right? None of these are your own cars. None of these are your own drivers. They're empaneled by you, of course, and they're partners with you. So I have to go to what is the operational complexity of delivering a high quality service, right? Because the driver may say, look, I'm not going to drop you here, or this is not included, or I want to add something. So every time, even the first few times I had rented on Savaari, I was like very anxious that the person might say, I'll drop you in Yelahanka, but I'm not going to come to Whitefield. And I'm like, dude, with my baggage and all that, I can't make another switch. Now, in theory, it's promised. But when you started in 2006 or maybe even 2010, when you moved full time, how did you evolve it so that the driver and the quality of service could evolve to give a good experience to the customer? Given that you don't own the car, you don't own the driver, you're really just a partner to them, and you're probably taking a reasonable take rate also from them.
Sure. So I think, of course, if from day one, we knew that we have to provide a reliable quality service, and that too at very, very competitive rates. So that was very, very clear in our mind. So we have worked around this problem, and it takes a long time to actually fix this. But for example, it starts with, what kind of partners you're onboarding. So there has to be a very good check in ensuring that these are the guys who have been probably, more in the business, own a few cars or at least 1 or 2 cars and have been running their business well. So that is very, very important. So it starts with, ensuring that the partners that you're onboarding have a certain quality. And then the second thing that we have relied from day one is, for me, a car could be clean. For you, car may not be clean. So that's where we have gone with the perception that the customer got after having traveled with us, which is, captured in a very simple feedback is yes or no. You like the car or you didn't like the car. Was the car clean or not? So that has been built into a great way as a feedback to our partners through our platform that, whether we need to sort of retrain him, whether we need to encourage him, giving some incentives, or whether we need to block him. So that is the second aspect that we have managed very well. And of course, it's course corrections that are happening. You are fine tuning. The third bigger aspect is communication. So we have people, there are 4 very important guys that are involved in ensuring a great service. So one is our ops team, second is our vendor partners, third is our driver, and fourth is a customer. And of course, over longer trips, it becomes even more difficult. So all we have to ensure is that at any point of time, at any stage or event in that trip, all the 4 have to be on the same page. And that's what sort of has delivered us great sort of satisfaction scores. I mean, our NPS is in the range of 60 plus. It's one of the highest that you would find in a very, very tough sort of
very difficult market, right? Yes. To solve for. Yeah. So help me understand, what does it mean to be on the same page? Is it just communication? Is it alignment? Like the customer, the vendor partner, the driver?
Setting the expectation of what is to be expected by the customer
before they go on.
Before they get on, and even at various stages. So I can't tell you 10 terms and conditions that are there. You may not read it. So I'll break it into 2. Maybe I'll give you 2 when you make the booking, 2 when the driver detail are shared with you, and another 2 when the driver has come. So that's how we have divided, and we are giving very relevant information at the relevant time. Of course, you have access to all the TNCs that are there.
Of course.
So that's what I mean by communication.
Understood. How about maybe just a little bit more on Savaari, and then we'll go back to the building of the company and the fundraising and all that. How about the unit economics and profitability and so forth, right? Because of course you are asset light. How do you think about that? Was it always unit economics profitable on day 0, or did it take some time to scale it to make it unit economics profitable or overall profitable at a company level? Maybe talk to us a little bit about that.
So from the start, given at least Intercity as a business has always had very good unit economics. And of course, we have over the years, we have taken we have done certain experiments, taken our chances where we have decided, we'll not worry about unit economics. But naturally, our investors as well as our team and founders, we are all aligned that, we are doing a dhanda for making money. So we have to be unit economics. So our unit economics have to be positive. So for example, even now, and we keep a very close eye on that. It's our contribution margin as a percentage of our net revenue is around 60%.
Wow.
So even if I take off my acquisition cost, we are still at 40%. So the very first customer that comes gives us money. So that's something that we hold very close to our heart. And the whole idea is that we are providing enough value to the customer that they should be fine and willing to pay us that money. And of course, the value is provided to the driver also, so that he is interested in working with us. So it's been there, and somehow we have never been very aligned that, let's let it go altogether. Short terms, yeah, it makes sense. But at the end, we have to ensure that the value is getting the money.
Understood. Let's switch gears a little bit on the fundraising journey. I know early on you said you got good reception from VCs and others. You raised, in fact, Rutvik, right, of Inventors now and Athira. Inventors then and Athira now, right? He was one of the early investors, or their firm was the investor. Talk to us a little bit about how that was. And then obviously the big thing that caught my attention with your recent kind of large investment from MakeMyTrip was the fact that you hadn't raised anything for 10 years. I was like, wow, okay, there are people like that. I know like a handful, but so talk to us about just the whole building of the company and the capital raise process, both early and then later on when either you didn't want to or you couldn't raise.
Okay. So of course, as I mentioned that, sort of when I was moving back to India, I had made a trip and I met some of the VCs. So Inventors, of course, now Athira, was the first VC that I had met. So of course, when I moved back, I kept in touch, and in fact, they became our corporate customers. So then towards the end of that 2011 is when I moved, they offered us a term sheet because they were fairly happy and they wanted to get into this segment. And by 2012 March is when we closed our first round, which is a series. And of course, in those times, the amounts were much
more modest,
very modest. So here, sort of within the first 12 months of raising that capital, I think we grew very well. Then we thought, it makes sense for us to raise Series B. And within 3 weeks of running this process, we could get a term sheet from Intel Capital. So That also round closed fairly
quickly.
And of course, we went on doing our business, and then something very big happened where Uber entered the Indian market. And of course, that changed things quite drastically. And then, of course, soon we saw that SoftBank followed a 210 million round in one of our competitions. So that's where, in early 2015, so 2013 is when Uber entered, and early 2015 is when we needed to raise capital, and we said, we'll raise our Series C. But when we went to sort of VCs, I think in their mind, they had two big players, very well-funded players, and the market was completely written off. So, of course, one is that the mental pressure of, not raising money. The second aspect is, of course, the problems that come with that. For example, we just had a runway for 6 months. So we had to make changes fast. So we had a team of around 200 people then. So we sort of restructured, and, we had to let go of 100 folks. And then at that point, we were doing both the intra-city as well as intercity. Intra-city, of course, the long-term duration rentals like 4 or 8 hour. But then we completely sort of started sharply focusing on intercity because it had great unit economics. And we felt that, that's a market that probably makes more sense for us. So that's how sort of we started looking at it. And then, of course, Inventors has been a great support throughout. They gave us a bridge round in 2016. But, of course, we worked hard. We saw enough traction. Unit economics was always great for Intercity. So we could actually stabilize things. And by 2019, it became our first financial year that we became profitable. So that's how sort of we were able to manage. And of course, some of the things that we learned was that, you have to keep a very close eye on your net cash. So how much of net cash you have if you were to suppose shut tomorrow. So much so that, every month we used to report it in the board meeting till of course the acquisition happened.
Now everybody does it. Thanks to 2021 and 22 more than 21.
Yeah, so that's how so we stabilized. And of course, just when we thought things were looking all well, the great thing happened. COVID happened.
Yes, of course. Very interesting things, unfortunately. But, talk a little bit about the competitive landscape, right? One is, of course, ability or inability to raise capital because Uber is funded, Ola is funded. I think Taxi for Sure was also much later acquisition by Ola, right? 2018?
It was right after they raised the SoftBank round, they acquired.
They acquired, right? This thing.
They couldn't raise the money.
Yeah. So how do you, how was that playing in your mind in terms of the business strategy? Right. One is, of course, fundraising that, get to break even, get to profitable, because who knows whether you'll be able to raise or not. The second is, did that have any bearing on the fact that, look, Uber and Ola are both, and Taxi for Sure, going hard at the intra-city market. Therefore, I should abandon that because it's going to be a brutal fight and go stick to maybe a different core competence and really do that. Was there any bearing on the competitive landscape as you thought about continuing to build and run the business?
So just for your information, when we raised our first round, everyone there, including our competition, they were just sort of looking at consolidating this car rental market and then sort of, making money out of that. But then, of course, Uber phenomena was happening way back in the US. And these guys sort of, they switched gears. They said, let's focus on the on-demand thing. But as far as we were concerned, we were fairly thrilled and excited about the market and the opportunity and the value that we have provided, which is a simple, plain, this is a great big market. This is largely unorganized and there's a value to be given to the customer. So right since day one, that has not changed. And in fact, there was never a serious discussion, that should we also move to it because the wind is blowing that way. And thanks to our investors, both our investors, that they could, they were fine and not getting too swayed away. So that's why we never actually sort of looked at changing the thing. Of course, I'm not sure what would have happened had we also tried to do that, because as we know, one of the guys became successful, one of the competitor, but the other competitor had to shut shop. But looking back now, when I look back, I think it was the right thing, because even today, we are as excited about the potential that this market has and the value that we can provide to the customer that we were on day one. So for us, we stayed the course. We had a hard time. We couldn't raise because VCs, of course, they are smart people, so they can sway very well with the times. But we stayed course. We stayed put on what we believed, and till this day we believe. And the fact that MakeMyTrip has made this investment in us, because they also believe the same thing, is a great proof and a great validation of our strategy that we stuck to our guns.
Fantastic. Switching gears just a little bit, talking about the VC angle for a moment. And this is more for me as a benefit to the VC as opposed to not necessarily the entrepreneur, which is, a lot of VCs who are very product tech driven struggle with these operationally intensive businesses, what advice would you give people like me, particularly since I've got the mic, right? In terms of how to evaluate these businesses, right? What are operational problems that are more manageable, either through brute force or by hiring right people or processes? And what are the things that you would define, you would say, hey, watch out, right? If that is an issue, right? So how should we evaluate operationally intensive businesses?
So I would think that ours is a very, very operational intensive business. So much so that every day the car has to reach on time. Right. So, but you can always find parameters and metrics around it that can give you great satisfaction. Even in our case, what are the early indicators? Of course, the car will not reach is the outcome that we have to deal with. But 2 hours before, can I know based on certain indication on the ground that, it's not going to reach and I better figure an alternate. So like in our business, we have parameterized a lot of things. So even if I were to look at, I would look at, for example, unit economics is a great metric. And even for me, how much money are you making if suppose I were doing a more leasing the cars on a monthly basis? What money I'm making? Because I saw a business plan where there was no talk of it while they're sort of almost owning cabs. So I think those are the basic things that at least even no matter how much operations intensive it is, you can always parameterize it and have enough metrics that gives you the satisfaction to get a good logical sense that what is being talked about is actually playing out.
And Gaurav, was that the DNA from day zero, or obviously it would have evolved, or did that kind of happen much later when there was some heft and scale? And initially it was a lot more on human intelligence and spreadsheet and call center just figuring out gaadi pahunchi ki nahi pahunchi, has the car reached or not?
I'll be honest, it started like that. But I think once we raised the Series A, Inventors of course brings a lot of experience, and they did bring that culture that, and we used to have meetings every month. So there was a lot of data that was being asked on. So I think that helped us figure out that, there are 3 important aspects in our business and we should have enough parameters. And now we have dashboards which can help you go 2 or 3 layers deep for all those, growth is one, execution is other, and basic unit economics and financial is the third one. So we have enough dashboards, there are reports that are generated. And then we have a culture that every first and third Saturday, the core team will sit and each team will present their own number. So one is that it keeps everyone on the toes. And the second is we get the benefit of, someone else looking at it, a different perspective coming to the table. So I think that's how we manage our business. So most of the story is in the data. And of course, there can be data, you can have a lot of data, but not drive any meaningful insight. So we try to make as much sense and as many actions as we can take based on data.
Wonderful. How about, this recent, equity investment from both MakeMyTrip and also they bought out, I think most or all of your investors, right? How did you make that decision? It's like a pretty big decision in some sense, right? I'm sure a fortuitous one as well, but what was the mental model going through your mind in terms of taking that investment and giving them a significant or a majority stake?
So basically, once, of course, VCs are in, I think exit is inevitable. So you have to find, of course, you owe them an exit. So that was one. And of course, it's been 10 years that they have been, 10 plus years that they have been with us. So exit was always there in the mind, at least from their perspective. So, and given that FY23, we did really well, while of course the travel was still recovering, we grew 40% on a pre-pandemic number. So we were we had some...
On a trajectory.
Yeah, some great momentum happening. And that's where some inbound interest happened from one of the prominent OTAs saying that they are interested, they offered a value. And we thought, it's better to just reach out to a larger set. And that's how we reached out to MakeMyTrip. And then we felt that they are as excited about this opportunity as we are. They have also tried to take a crack at it through a marketplace model while we have been a company. And there were great synergies. By the way, in their marketplace, we are one of the suppliers. So we have a working relationship with MakeMyTrip for a long, long time. So that's why we knew people. We knew that they understand. They're very sincere. They're very serious about doing this Intercity cash. Because for most of the OTAs, air and hotel is where the attention is, or holidays. But cabs does not become as as important for them. But MakeMyTrip showed that they meant business. So that's how it happened, and we see that it's a great chapter in our life. So for the next 3-5 years, we have a great shot in making Savaari a very, very big Intercity company, and all the team is very excited about it.
No, fantastic. I of course have fond memories. I worked at MakeMyTrip from the pre-IPO days and so forth. But one point that you said is very, very important and interesting, and I'd like to iterate it for a lot of the founders listening to this is, in M&A, it doesn't just happen like you call someone and say, okay, I'm looking to sell or I'm looking to buy, right? You need to have a relationship. You need to have worked with them before. You need to have seen and appreciated their culture. They need to have seen and appreciated you and your team and your culture. So oftentimes founders are like, no, but I'm only going to go IPO. There is no other option. Or I'm only going to run this for the next 20 years or 40 years. It still is very smart to cultivate some relationship, some option value, some network, etc. Because you never know. In this case, you didn't necessarily need it, but you chose to exercise that option, right? And a lot of founders feel like, wait, why are you telling me this? I don't want to sell. No, you don't want to sell, but who knows what you would want to do 5 years from now, right?
And there's an opportunity which makes sense. You should take it, because we felt that with the backing of the group, I think we'll stand a great shot at doing it. So yeah,
absolutely. One last thing on Savaari before we'll talk about your entrepreneurship kind of journey and how you evolved as an entrepreneur and as a person. Did you ever get tempted by some bells and whistles? Because it's whether it was the transportation on the inside, forget the fundraising for a second, or international market. I know there's one very exciting Chinese company, forget the name, which would basically take people, consumers from China who want to travel to, let's say, Singapore or India or Indonesia or South Africa, and they would give them a Chinese-speaking driver in the destination market that they travel. Like, given so many Indians are traveling abroad, I know my parents would love to have a Indian-speaking driver when they go to an alien country, right? Because then they're like, there's some comfort, you can ask the driver. Or any of these other bells and whistles. Did any of these attract? How did you stay so focused? Or was it just capital is a constraint, stay focused?
Maybe both. But I think, no. So we are actually, with us, you can make a decision that you want an English-speaking driver, Hindi-speaking driver, and we'll add more regional languages. So I think it's a necessity because there's a requirement.
Yeah.
There's a customer need for that. So, a lot of people, at least when they go to Chennai and all, they ask for a Hindi-speaking driver. So that feature we have. So, but we launched it only when we felt that there was a need and that it's actually sort of catering to a requirement from the customer. So we do have those. Chinese, no, but maybe one day we will.
No, not really. No, I wasn't even thinking Chinese. I was thinking Indians going abroad, given that you understand travel transportation. You could tie up with a travel partner in South Africa or in Indonesia or wherever. But when an Indian lands there, you give them an option to have a driver who speaks at least English, possibly Hindi or whatever else. But anyway.
So I think certainly an expansion should be there once we have cracked the Indian market. So I think we are still some distance from there.
You're in a large enough market. So that's good. So now, maybe talk a little bit about just your journey as an entrepreneur. Maybe some of the lessons learned for you in terms of the Gaurav circa 2010, circa 2015 or 2017 and circa 2024. What are things that you would advise yourself, or Gaurav of 2017 or Gaurav of 2010, that you could have done differently or should have done differently, or maybe should have done the same?
Yeah. So of course, in hindsight, I would have wanted that, maybe I would not have sort of moonlighted for 5 years. Once you have an idea, jump on it, I think. And there's no backup plan. So just go with it. And of course, the things that we have done, some of the things we didn't control. But I think the 10-year journey, ideally, I would want to maybe squeeze it in 5-6 years and do that way. The other thing is, of course, even when I started like anyone else, when I moved back to India, my idea was also that, in 5 years, I'll do an exit and then that's it. But it takes much longer. So anyone who's trying to start out now should be very well prepared that no matter how good Excel plan you have, it always takes longer to build a product. Maybe at least twice that you would have planned. It will cost you much more. And that's third thing is even the traction may take time. So those are the learnings that, even when you think that you have everything in control, even now, launching a feature takes much longer than what you would think because there's so many components that are involved. So yeah, should have done faster, have been a little more, maybe more aggressive, but that is in hindsight.
Understood.
I think going forward, what we are doing is probably the right pace that we are going in.
So let me push back a little bit on that, right? Given that you stayed so frugal, even if, necessity was the mother of invention, there is always a stress that entrepreneurs have in terms of the growth rate, right? So of course you can grow at 10, 15% or even sometimes even a flat year on year to remain, kind of profitable or bootstrapped or not needing to get capital. But then you feel like, look, I want to grow much faster. If you grow much faster, you may end up getting into the burn and other kind of bad habits, but you're growing faster because the market is still there, right? Even now you're saying, look, there's no dearth of market opportunity in India. So how do you trade off the need and desire for growth to compress your 10-year journey into a 5-year journey, right? With the sort of losing sight of the profitability, unit economics, etc. Because there is definitely a trade-off, right? There.
Which certainly is true. So in our case, I mean, it's not that we didn't try. We tried to raise, but we couldn't. So,
yes.
And we knew very well that, this market probably is sort of, mobility is not in the flavor of the day. Yeah. For quite some years now. So, but, in our case, for example, if we were to raise a large round tomorrow or maybe earlier, I think there's a lot of marketing that can be done without compromising on the unit economics. The fact is that we have a great product. How fast can you tell? I mean, can I stand on a rooftop, on every rooftop, and actually shout that, hey, tomorrow when you were to rent, please use it. So I think, at least in our case, if we were to just employ that money in marketing, and it's not that I have to discount it so that one trial and then lifetime value for 5 years, nothing like that. I would still make money, but I can benefit immensely if I get an opportunity that there's so many more people that can know about Savaari. So far, majority of our acquisitions happen through organic ways, that someone searches and then they find us and then they become a customer.
And they find you mostly through SEO or content?
So we do very well. Both content and SEO.
Content and SEO.
So those have been our driving factors. So I'm saying, but of course, and in any case, if you have an option to raise money, I think one should, of course, till the time, it's not coming with unrealistic expectations.
Understood. Great. As we get towards the kind of end of the podcast, right? Maybe a few rapid fire questions and then we'll kind of wrap up. So I know you shared some of this already, but one do and one don't for either current or aspiring founders, right? Maybe a new one than the one that you already shared, like just do it, Nike slogan.
So just do it and, be prepared for a longer haul. I mean, nothing comes easily. And that applies even to us, things take their own time. So you have to be very patient and you have to be at it. And I think the fundamental thing is you have to be passionate about what you're solving. So that, even today, every day I look forward to coming because there's always some problem solving to be done. So you have to be passionate about the problem. And of course, if you experience the problem firsthand, it's an amazing thing. And if the market is big, I think you're lucky. Now you have to just execute. So, and don't is, don't, I mean, quite a few times we think, I'm not happy here. Let me become an entrepreneur. I'll become rich quick. That never ever happens. And of course, it's like some of the people do get lucky. They may not have very rich companies, but they're rich entrepreneurs. But it's like much like lottery, you can get lucky there too. So,
absolutely. No, I
but in general, it's very hard.
Couldn't agree with you more on both points. In the overall kind of ecosystem, right? Entrepreneurship or even other, leadership, sports, don't want to get into politics, but which leaders inspire you the most? Which entrepreneurs, leaders, business leaders, anybody that inspires you personally?
So I think given that a large part of my time and day goes into Savaari, so I think any entrepreneur, and I've experienced this firsthand, any entrepreneur which is able to actually generate great growth, I mean, good growth with profitability is someone that I would really, really admire. I think that's something which to strike the balance is a great thing. And I know personally, even companies which are not VC funded and even VC funded who are doing that. So great admiration for such companies. So that will be something that I really admire. And I would think Savaari also falls in somewhere.
For sure. No, I mean, I think you are now one of the handful of poster boys, right? For having both grown and survived through so many challenges, right?
And interestingly, all our survival, both times when we couldn't raise Series C and even in COVID, is happened through customer money because we were providing them a value that we could depend on their money and we could thrive.
Yeah, I always tell founders that customer money is way better than VC money. Any day of the week and twice on Sunday. Yeah. Any content that you consumed or have consumed, whether it is a book, article, podcast, anything that you're an avid listener to that you would advise for other entrepreneurs?
So that's so that's kind of a tough one. So I don't. It's difficult for me to actually.
No worries. Or maybe let me twist it. any learning that you received from someone, right? Saying it doesn't even have to attribute to anyone. We can keep it to Chatham House rules, right? Like this one thing you learned from somebody that really made a big difference in how you built Savaari or how you grew yourself as a professional. Some piece of advice, anything of that nature that comes to mind.
So generally I would just quote from, so there's this sitcom called Frasier. Which is one of my favorite ones.
Oh, Frasier. Yes, of course I know. Yeah.
So in this, the father of the central character, Frasier, of course he's giving him relationship advice, but I think it applies to entrepreneurs too, was that, when looking back in your life, you don't regret the decisions which you took and you messed up, made a fool of yourself, but the ones that you never took. So I think that applies very aptly. So that is something that when we keep trying, whenever there's an opportunity in Savaari, and I think for a broader entrepreneur ecosystem, that applies very well.
If you could shadow any entrepreneur for a day or have dinner with them or whatever, like a private dinner, who would that be and why?
So as I mentioned, any guy who's growing well and is profitable, I think there will be a lot to learn from them, for me.
Okay. If you had to start up all over again for a moment in a different industry from what you see, let's stick to India for a moment. Which industry would you pick or which sector? Anything that inspires you right now saying, man, there is a lot of unsolved problems there. If you were starting up in 2024, that may be an area to consider.
So interestingly, I've done a business which is heavy on ops. So my next business or next industry has to be non-ops, absolutely non-ops, so that I can get both sides. And ops is different. So, something like maybe Google of 2000 or, Perplexity of today, something like that I'll be interested in, which can challenge me academically a little more than just pure ops. So that's what it will be. If I get to it, which I don't see, I'll get to doing something.
Got it. Gaurav, this has been fantastic. Any closing thoughts or comments, advice for people starting up or people running their companies? Beyond, of course, profitability and growth, which is the mantra for this podcast.
So I think enjoy what you're doing. Don't worry too much. I mean, there's always peer pressure. Maybe your guy who's working in Google is earning more than you. But I think do your thing and be at peace with it. If you're not at peace with it, you better do something else. Beyond that.
Absolutely. Satya Vachan. That is the truth. Thank you so much, Gaurav. Thanks for being on the Prime Venture Partners podcast. It was a delight to have you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast app for free, and you'll be the first one to know when new episodes are available. Just search for Prime Venture Partners podcast in Apple Podcast, Spotify, Castbox, or however you get your podcasts. Then hit subscribe. And if you have enjoyed the show, we would be really grateful if you leave us a review on Apple Podcast. To read the full transcript, find the link in the show notes.